afternoon. It's my great pleasure to introduce the moderator of today's panel, Robert Storr. Robert Storr is an artist, curator, and critic who currently serves as Dean of the Yale School of Art. Storr was curator and then chief curator in the Department of Painting and Sculpture at the Museum of Modern Art, New York from 1990 to 2002. He's been a contributing editor to Art in America since 1981 and frequently writes for Art Forum, Art Press, Frieze, and many other publications. He has written numerous catalogs and books. He was director of the visual arts for the 2007 edition of the Venice Biennale, the first American invited to oversee this prestigious international exhibition of contemporary art. Storr is chairman of FAPE's Professional Fine Arts Committee and the curator of this exhibition. We welcome Rob Storr, who will serve as the moderator for today's panel, FAPE and the Role of the Arts. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I want to welcome you all here on behalf of FAPE and say that we're very glad to have this exhibition here, this group of artists here, and to have the occasion to sort of talk and think out loud about what it is that we do, why we do it, and whither, so to speak. Before thanking all the other people involved, I would like to just also remember Mickey Strauss, who was a very important part of Guildhall and who was a very close personal friend of mine for many years. Now, I will say some more about the program when I get to the place that I sit, which is on the end there. I'll introduce the artists now, but just to say that the general thing that everybody should know. The general thing that everybody should know is that this is an entirely voluntary organization. We are not part of the government. We do something that the government has embraced, but it is made possible by individual acts of generosity in kind, in material means, in all kinds of ways. And it is something that people who are involved give to the country. It is, in fact, an act of patriotism without there being any political attachments to it in any way whatsoever. And it is done in the interests of American contemporary art and in the interests of having what is being done in this country known increasingly in other parts of the world, and also in the interest of having it be part of the lives of people who serve in embassies in various parts of the world. We have many, many audiences for this program, but maybe the first audience is the person who sits at the desk beneath or adjacent to this work of art. And it's significant that if people go abroad in service to the State Department and in service of American foreign policy, and by the way, one doesn't have to agree on that foreign policy, the people who are professional diplomats do their job regardless. That work there is something they can think about when they're not thinking about trade agreements and peace treaties and passports and all the many things that are done at embassies. It's a chance to take their minds from one immediate task or problem, often very daunting, often very divisive problems, and think about something that opens their minds in other directions. The same is true for the people who come to those embassies. If they have an image implanted of America, whether it's implanted by the media or by news organizations or by political speakers or whatever it is, that they will see something that is unlikely part of their idea of America already, and that they will also recognize in the diversity of the works that they encounter in any given embassy the fact that there is no one America. There are many Americas, generations, aesthetics, ethnicities, you name it, and that in and of itself, just the recognition of that variety and of the vitality of that variety is a thing that might be of interest to them and might somewhat change their sense of the monolithic nature of this country as it is either spoken about or sometimes speaks about itself. So, with that as a sort of preface, I'm going to introduce the panelists, each one of whom indeed represents a different background, a different experience, a different aesthetic, and each one of them has done a major project for the Art and Embassies program. The first in order will be Joel Shapiro, who has contributed most recently a major sculpture to the Chinese embassy in Guangzhou, American Embassy in China in Guangzhou, but is also the author of the first major commission done for FAPE, which was in Ottawa. And since my wife is Canadian, and since she went to school in Ottawa, I have a particular affection for that project. Lynda Benglis, who has now contributed a major project to Mumbai, and whose work both Joel and Lynda are represented in this exhibition, is somebody who has lived between India and the United States for many, many years. So she herself is a kind of a shuttle diplomat. She will speak next, and she, of course, is represented in museums all over this country and is a major, major figure, as is Joel. Tina Barney, as a photographer, has contributed to this program in terms of giving one of the first sets of photographs. It should be known that this program of prints and photography is one of the constants of what we do. There are big commissions, but there are also prints that are made by artists that are then spread around among as many embassies as the size of the edition will permit. And for many years, those prints were basically prints on paper. And Sid Felsen, who's here, produced many of them, and by the way, donated that production to the FAPE program. But more recently, photography as a medium has come into play, and we have a group of photographs in the gallery which represent what we've done thus far, not counting individual photographs given by people like Lee Friedlander to specific embassies. And then Odili Odita, who is a young American artist of African extraction, but an American artist nonetheless, and that is an important thing. We have many artists who come from someplace else who are American citizens who have participated. Odita has done a major project at the USUN, actually 2 projects at the USUN, on 2 floors of that building, unique murals for that building, and has been very, very generous to us along the lines. He, meanwhile, has been in many, many other exhibitions. He was in my Venice Biennale in 2007. So all of these artists represent people of international standing, of national standing, and of enormous generosity. So with that as a general introduction to them and the program, I will just invite them to come on stage. And what we're going to talk about is why they did it, and what they did, and how they felt about the experience of engaging in this process. Thank you. In order to make this a lively afternoon, we have not programmed it, and we're just going to have a conversation amongst ourselves, and at a certain point we'll open it up to the floor. So with that, I'd like to start with Joel, since he really truly was the first artist to do a major commission for FAPE, and I wonder if he could talk about that commission, about the one most recently done in China, and about his feelings in general about being in this context and doing this amount of work entirely for the benefit of the people who see it.
The opportunity to do a sculpture in relationship with an interesting architectural setting is really challenging, and there was not a lot of time with the Ottawa piece, and actually the building wasn't completed, but it was fairly advanced. I went up to see the space and came up, built a model of the building, and started to think about my work in terms of the context of the commission. So you're sort of no longer working in your studio space. I mean, it's still the same mental space, but now you're applying it to this sort of large architectural complex. And that was really a tough commission because that building was deeply secure. As most embassies are that are being built, but this one in particular was had lots of reinforcement of massive stainless steel and glass and fences, and in a way it was hard. And the way I thought about the piece, that it was this architectural complex separating sort of lower Ottawa to upper Ottawa, and there was a big staircase. So the piece is almost leaping out over the staircase, and way above the fence line, which is a pretty imposing fence line. So I think the sculpture was very accessible, and it was an exciting project, and I learned a lot. So, it's critical, artists don't evolve and develop without opportunity to make work, and in this case, to make work on a large scale, in the actual world versus their studio. The commission in Guangzhou was different because I was in touch with the architect from the inception of the compound. I had no influence on how it developed, but we did discuss placement of the piece, and I was very aware of all the material, the nature of the material. So the gestation of that work was much longer. And I think the important thing about FAPE And so it's great that, you know, they're really allowing artists to function with a high degree of freedom. I've never been told, do this, do that, we want it to look like this, we want it to look like that. I think they've been incredibly open and understanding of the nature of art and the possibility of what art can do and communicate. So it's sort of the best aspect of the country. I mean, it sort of reinforces individual freedom. And I think by having work like that at embassies, it really is a statement of trust and faith. And it's important. And you really develop as an artist. I mean, I learned an awful lot doing both commissions. I don't know, what else can I say? And I'm grateful for it. I mean, really, it was an opportunity. You know, it's a sort of unencumbered. And faith is really, a FAPE has been great, not faith. The faith of FAPE.
Actually, doing my project at the UN was really rewarding in ways that I experiencing even now. I put up the piece, I believe, in 2010. I came to the building to see the space, and it was amazing to see the UN being put together, the new UN building being put together. They had the security booths and so forth. They were scanning every piece of drywall that went into the place, high security all the way through. So you knew that this was a serious project to go forward with. What I was thinking about with the two walls that I was given was the fact that everybody from Hillary Clinton at the time to all the other dignitaries coming into the world and coming from the world into New York City would come to this wall. And I knew that this wall had to be something grand. I wanted to think about how I was going to select those colors to convey that feeling, to convey that sentiment of people coming from different places with different interests, different ideas, thoughts, coming to speak together in this place, the United Nations. And so that design, that pattern I put together was in a certain sense like a flag of different minds and different voices brought together onto one wall, onto one surface, together as a whole. Now, with the second floor, I was wanting to do a little bit something different with the colors. I knew that the colors on the first floor had to have a certain kind of stateliness, kind of appearance of being grounded, maybe in nature, in the space of nature, but being grounded. The second floor, I wanted to do something that would open that up to a bit more vivaciousness, a bit more, say, a fuller, more pleasurable sense of being. Let's say maybe a conclusion after enlightenment, let's say, being enlightened and then coming to some space of understanding after discussion and after a conclusion. So the colors were a bit more, were a bit brighter, were a bit, they had a greater sense of flicker to them, and even I was even able to do this, a band of color that went over would go over the person, and it was on the ceiling. So I was able to experiment in certain ways a bit more architecturally on the second floor with that space. But just to end this, I wanted to say that I've been thinking a lot about my experience as an artist in America. I'm Nigerian, I was born in Nigeria. I left Nigeria during the start, right before the start of the Biafran War, basically fleeing the country. I have been able to grow and prosper in this country as an individual and as an artist, as a human being. And for the whole time, I've always been thinking of myself as an artist from Nigeria. I'm speaking from Africa, I'm speaking with this voice. And only recently have I begun to understand that, my voice is also American. And most of my experiences and accomplishments have happened here in America through situations like this with FAPE and other things as well. So it's interesting for me to start to come to terms with the fact that, yes, I'm Nigerian, but I'm also American, and wanting to actually embrace all the things that I've achieved through this place, in this space, and actually understand how I can put that more evidently in the work that I make. So this is something that I've been just thinking about as an artist, and it's really interesting to have this situation here with FAPE, to be able to do that project there and see how all these different cultural experiences have come together to culminate with a work like that.
Lynda, could you speak a little bit, since you also, in a sense, exist in two national realities? How has that been, and how does it make you think about the things you've done for us?
I found the experience working in Walla Walla, Washington on 2 of the pieces that you see there. I actually did 13. That was maybe my lucky and unlucky number, because once I got to India, I found that there were, as has been mentioned, a lot of things that were both positive and negative. But the fact that the building had taken so long, and there were different contractors going back and forth because of the limits of the situation with our government, and I should say that we certainly should do something about that in certain areas. And I encourage all of you that are thinking about the political aspects and giving to join with me in supporting the art that's been done, as well as the art that has been commissioned. I've decided to really go forth in wall work and do as large of pieces as the scale of the drawing would permit. I did, as I said, more than necessary in this case, because the quality of the situation and the rules were the limitation. So it was not ideal circumstances, but once I got the 3 pieces and I thought they best suited the space that was originally given to me, they worked fine. Now, the FAPE went all out to support my efforts, and they went all out to bring them back, those that weren't used. So that's about what I have to say. I would like to say something about abstraction and why I do it. It's an international way of communicating. It's gets nobody's feathers, raised, and people individually, when they see something, they relate to it, particularly if they find things that they can relate to. So it's my purpose to try to do that, to try to make things that are subjective, but at the same way, very generalized. I've thought of them as things that have to do with meditation, particularly these that you see now. They're rather tantric, and they allude to a process, but the process can't really be discovered by looking, mostly by feeling. So that's about all I have to say.
Let me just interject 2 things. Number one, we have Lynda not only to thank for the projects which are displayed, a sample of which are displayed here, and there's the photograph of Mumbai, but also she's one of the contributors to the USUN, and when you look at that panoramic shot of the top room, there's the Solowit cupola sort of shaft, there's Ron Gorchow's piece, and then to one side is another one of Lynda's pieces. So she's actually done a lot for us. But I will say only this in terms of the 13 pieces that came home. One of them we were going to put up, it was so large that it would have brought the Guildhall walls down. So when people ask questions about what are the limitations of FAPE, the limitations of FAPE are basically only physical. They're not ideological. And the one thing we're bound and determined not to do is to destroy buildings in order to put up some art. So other than that, we do everything we can for the artists and everything we can for the situation artistically. So. Tina, could you talk a little bit about your experience and the photographs you made and how you thought about what images to take?
Thank you, Rob, and thank FAPE for having us all here today. What's very interesting about this project for me is I did not make the photograph that's in the Guild Hall here for FAPE purposely. It's from a series I did called Small Towns, and then was chosen to fit this FAPE's sort of installations. But what I think about every time we meet and talk about what we're doing here is that the incredible responsibility of the work that you make, that you sort of make on your own, in your own little way, in your own little studio, and struggle, and you can take years, and then all of a sudden you realize it's placed out there in the world. And this is a very different context from a collector buying your work or a museum buying your work. And slowly, more and more, I start getting a little bit more nervous about, this is in a very kind of political situation. The context, I'm not sure I'm really familiar with. And the choice that's made of the work that's in this, this group is very important. The picture that I have here called The Color Guard is very patriotic. It's very much about the things that are very important to me. Very primarily being an American, but also my fascination with the rituals that people make or take or hand down from generation to generation through families. When you watch these little children on a hot summer day in their costumes that look 18th century, and what they're doing there, they're imitating their parents, their grandparents, their great-great-grandparents, and how much aware they are of being an American or what they're doing. And I think this picture fits perfectly for the situation and made me really think much more about what I do. What I also think about is where the picture is going. I think we made 50 prints, I'm not sure, but that's an awful lot. And where that picture is going to be in the world, how people are going to look at it, what they are going to think of it, which is sort of out of my control. Which I hope we get some feedback about and see, you know, the reactions of what we do. So this is very much the beginning and very interesting to me of how it's all going to work out. I also want to make some point about Joel's work. What was hard for me is seeing his sculpture just in a photograph that's 8 by 10 inches. It's very difficult to know all those things that are important to you and how you worked it out, which is, you know, too bad we can't go there ourselves and see it in person. So, well, one day maybe. But I think this is an amazing kind of beginning. I feel like it's a beginning, even though FAPE has been going on for a long time, and a wonderful kind of future that lies ahead.
I think that is important. I mean, this is truly an ongoing project, and there are many embassies that need work. There are embassies still being built. There are all kinds of occasions to enhance what there is. For example, one patron of our group gave us a whole suite of Jackson Pollock prints not long ago, and I went to Berlin to hang the Pollock prints in a building which already had Saul Lloyd, Ellsworth Kelly, and so on and so forth. And it was very interesting to see the excitement around this new old work showing up. And of course then remember that when Pollock was first shown in Europe in the late 1950s, in depth, I mean, he was known of before then, but there was a big Pollock show, you know, that he really changed the perceptions that people had of what this country was about. Essentially, if people understand that we take ourselves seriously artistically, they will take us seriously artistically. And I think that is a significant thing. We put serious work out, and then other things will happen that we have no control over, but are all of them grist for some serious thinking.
That's a very good point.
Yeah.
I think what Lynda was saying about abstraction being sort of not easier to place, but that's an interesting thought. Is abstraction can be very political, but also it takes a certain kind of not educated eye, but maybe more so than that's, for instance, my work, which is so specific, which is kind of scarier for me. But I think that's an interesting sort of point to make.
Well, I just add that it's, you know, having worked in museums for a long time, the initial reaction of most people to something that they've never seen before is wary, if not hostile. They don't like being confronted with something that they don't know what to think about. And then with a relatively brief pause, people begin to say, I kind of like this experience of not knowing what I think about, or not even knowing what it is. And then once you've got them there, it develops and it evolves, and then it becomes a renewable resource for fresh thoughts. And I think abstraction actually is ideal that way. People tend to prefer figuration because they can get it faster. Very likely they will then not like what they get because they'll read it in a very restricted way. But with abstraction, it's an open door.
Well, one of the things that I questioned in the beginning was what kind of audiences are in embassies? I mean, we're supposed to really know that. I probably should know that. But what is the general sort of, is there a general kind of audience that goes through embassies around the world?
Depends on the embassy, on the
Obviously.
consulate. I know in China, there's a massive amount of people, everyone applying for visas who want to come to the United States. And I think every American who may be adopting a child or perhaps doing business in China goes to the consulate. I mean, they're congested. But again, I reiterate, I mean, I think what really is important about FAPE is the kind of real faith that art can indeed communicate, even though it's not easy. So I don't think, you know, and it's also doesn't have a nationalistic agenda. I mean, it's not, you know, the way lots of sculpture in the 1930s had a nationalistic agenda.
It's like looking at what the function of these embassies are, how they function in a certain sense. Being able to see that in a certain way, they're like a platform for safe haven. The idea is that people can come to the place, to these embassies, and not feel any sense of, say, threat or alienation. And alienation is something that is like, say, acid in one's body. It makes one feel separate from the world that in the space that they exist in, like being a foreigner. And then having this notion of foreignness in your mind and having that sense of foreignness in your body, that's something that is like a sickness. And these spaces, these embassies, and the work that's brought into these embassies to make people feel a connection to not only America, but to other places as well. Because in fact, this is very complicated, but I want to try to make it simple. When I went to work in Tallahassee, Florida to teach at FSU for a number of years, I learned that, you know, there's more than one type of America, that this is just a region of America, and that this is an aspect of America. And I met people from other parts of America, and I realized that America is a multitude of voices and interests and consciousness. So you have in these embassies all these different artists, like the ones here at this table, who are presenting their point of view. And this is the kind of thing that is brought forward in these spaces. Difference, and the way that difference is in this platform that brings community, commonality, and community. So that's how I see this organization, FAPE, and what they're doing in all these embassies is to bring a sense of safety, or at least a sense of comfort, or a notion of platitude from place to place and space to space around the world.
I just would like to add, whether it's figurative, also referred, it can be configurative. I think there's really no such thing as abstraction. We abstract in all sorts of ways. So everything is open in art, and I think in terms of what FAPE has done and is doing, they're presenting individual artists who do want to communicate and be political in the most positive way. And I think this is the most positive thing that can be done because it's harming no one. And we should support it, that's all.
I mean, I'd just like to say that, you know, I'm often asked questions about FAPE and what its secret agenda is, and I say, quite honestly, there is no secret agenda. We have never been in a position of turning an artist down in what they propose to do. We have never been in the position of telling an artist that we really would like you to do this or would like to do that. I mean, it really is open, so that if there is politics, it is the politics of the individual artist. It's not of the program. If there's a political understanding but no stated politics, it's likewise the individual artist and not the program. And it really is an organization with which I've worked for a long time. The spectrum goes all the way from me on the left to other people as far away on the other side of the spectrum, and we all get along very well, and we're all working at the same project. And just on one personal note, one of the people, one type of person that uses American embassies is Americans. And when I was turning 18 in Europe in 1967-68, I had to go to the American Embassy in Rome to register for a war, for the draft for a war that I disapproved of. And I really would have much rather looked at a serious work of art in that context than a bunch of bureaucratic pictures, which at that time was all there was. I would have felt better about the whole experience, which scared me an awful lot anyway. So I think if you give people something that is enhancing at the same time that they're doing whatever else they're doing, it registers. In terms of the way these commissions are done, as anybody who's ever worked on their own art or with an artist on their art, there are all kinds of unforeseeable opportunities as well as challenges. And when Odili was working on his project, he had these two walls which were essentially opposite an elevator bank, or it was in fact the elevator bank. And in the process of working on it, he realized the degree to which the way a wall turned off the flat and into a secondary wall was interesting. So as he was working on the project, he had, I don't know what it was, about 8 inches or something like that, of a sliver of a wall, but it had great sight lines from another angle. So we got an extra surface just as a result of that discovery. And I think Joel probably has similar experiences, maybe you did as well, of where once you really realized what the site was, by visiting it or seeing it documented, new ideas came in the process, no?
I'm presently after this event of making so many pieces and varied in grand scale. I decided I wanted to do fountains. So I'm told recently that FAPE is not supporting fountains, but too bad. I'm giving them away.
We did a fountain and the maintenance of the plumbing turned into such a nightmare, and doing plumbing, 10,000 miles away is a disincentive. So could we would. Maybe we should, does anybody else have a response to anybody else in the panel, or would we like to open it to the floor?
I just wanted to say that I absolutely agree with your notion of abstraction, that not believing or not having a sense of abstraction in the way that I understand it. I don't think that anything is abstract at all. And in fact, you can look at a line across a canvas becomes a horizon line, or vertical becomes a person. So there's great power, communicative power in abstraction, because it can say so many different things if you allow yourself to see what it can say and see what it can do.
It's just the style. It's just style. I mean, abstract, not abstract. It's really a question. I think the content in work transcends that. And that's the real difficulty in doing a commission, is to actually put something into it, that transcends the narrative and the stylistic aspect. That's hard to do. It has nothing to do with whether it's representation or not. I mean, it can be lively and abstract and lively and representational, or it could be dull and abstract and dull and representational. It's just sort of it's some low category that I think to some extent that sort of supplants the more difficult discussion, and that's, why is something interesting and why is something not interesting?
Well, in the world of public art, there are two terms. One is the corporate corsage, and the other one is plop art. And it describes a certain kind of thing that you see a lot, and FAPE does neither.
Right. Now, and because I've worked on the outside of buildings, it's sort of, where the work kind of mediates the architecture, and I've tried to make, and both sides, the work, people can't walk up to it and touch it because the embassy, the consulates are not open to the public so readily. The public goes in there, but they have to go through various security measures. But I've actually tried to make the work, so you can actually see it from the street, so it has some presence from the outside.
Now, does anybody have a question, a comment, a challenge? If you have it, please make it concise, but please make it. Yeah.
What sort of approvals are required from the State Department or any other government agency before artwork is placed?
Definitely. I mean, I think FAPE presents you with, the challenge and the sort of, where you're going to work, what you're going to do. And I think, the proposal has to be, at least in my experience, really had to be approved by the State Department. And the State Department, my experience with the State Department was really quite remarkable. I mean, they didn't challenge and question. In my sculpture in Guangzhou, I had it pointed at the opera. And I was told that that wasn't good because that wasn't Schwan. What is that Schwan? Sure, it was good. So it was turned around, so it was pointed at the Chinese IRS building. Everyone thought that was fabulous. That was really good. But I mean, I think the State Department, they were actively involved in the project. They were not actively involved in the aesthetics of the project. I mean, they wanted to say, you have to do this, you have to do that. They'd say, well, in this culture, you can't, it's rude to point in that direction, which is, you know, advice that I was happy to get.
You know, it's been constant that we have had people in the State Department and more broadly in the government who've seen the wisdom of this, who've understood the ground rules, and who've been very, very supportive. I mean, every year we have a dinner in Washington at the State Department, and this year Senator Kerry, now Secretary of State Kerry, made a speech, and I wanted to hire him. I mean, he was so good as an advocate for this program, and we've had the similar kind of input from other senior diplomats. But also, there was one State Department worker named Bernard Verghese, with whom I worked on a daily basis at the USUN, who was fantastic. He got it, he was interested in the art, and whenever he could see a roadblock materializing on the horizon within his bureaucracy, he stepped in, guided me away from it, around it, or simply went to the appropriate person in the State Department and said, now this is really what it's about, don't worry, this is okay, this will work, and made it happen. So I think, you know, I think the assumption is often that there are art people here and then there are mindless people on the other side who are just there to say, no, it is not at all like that.
No, I thought when I did the installation in China, the State Department was remarkable. I mean, they organized lots of outreach programs. I gave talks at radical museums. They were really proactive in a very effective fashion. I was impressed. I think without the support of the consulate being involved and liking the work and feeling that this is something that's meaningful to them, that it would be, you know, it would be a tough road.
And I think there's also a certain feeling in some parts of the United States that artists shouldn't have anything to do with their government, as if somehow we were the exception to every other country in the world. The French government actively supports French artists and does projects with them. I remember visiting the president of Germany's residence, which is this beautiful 19th century building, and walking in, and the walls were covered with paintings by contemporary hot German artists, then Polka, Jörg Immendorf, who was at that point a Maoist. All of these people were in the president's house. And there's no reason that these things can't happen, and American artists may be unaware that they do happen elsewhere. It is not some kind of terrible capitulation to power. It is actually a way in which our variety and textures become known, and it works.
At one point, the government supporting the visual arts or purchasing work became very controversial. And with Jesse Helms and, you know, and then the NEA and that why spend taxpayers' money, you know, on art and so forth and so on. Art that doesn't represent the personal values of my congressional district. And I think that, you know, and I think to some extent, you know, FAPE has really entered into that situation and replaced it where the funding is not from the government. People who are opposed to expression in general can't really oppose the program because they're not paying for it.
And in the case, Jesse Helms can't do it anymore now. Yeah.
How many embassies are there, and can you choose where a piece of artwork will go?
The question was, how many embassies are there where art will go? There is, in terms of the prints program and the photography program, art, I would think, in virtually all embassies. No individual project is enough to cover all embassies, or few anyway, but we send out a lot of work and so on. In terms of individual commissions, that's more complicated because you do have to take into account the site, you have to build the budgets, you have to find an artist who's willing to do it. But for example, Ellen Zimmerman, who's here, did a project for the embassy in Dar es Salaam, which was badly damaged in a terrorist attack, was rebuilt, and she stepped in and created a permanent major sculptural project of her own with our support in Dar es Salaam. People should know about that. It's a major piece of Ellen's work, and it's a major work of contemporary art under any circumstances. And we go that far. I went to see what was done in Istanbul, for example, by Maya Lin, who was one of the MacArthur winners, early on in the process at MacArthur, and she made, well actually she made a fountain, which was the one that I had to worry about, and she made a sundial. So, and they're documented on the wall in the other room. So, you know, they're very far afield, and we try to spread them as broadly, both the prints and photographs and major commissions as we can. In the back?
What is your relationship to art and embassies?
I don't know, we talk.
Okay, tension? Tension?
What?
Tension?
No, I mean, we're not doing the same thing, basically. There's some overlap, there's some confusion, and as I said, I have manifested it today, but I don't have any confusion about the fundamentals. No, we're doing a different kind of projects. Our things are permanent in the places where they're given, and art and embassies, basically, most of them, as I understand it, have been loans, both of the artist to the program and of the program to the sites. What is done by Joel or Lynda for Mumbai or for Canada or for China will stay put. They're not going anywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say to the artist, my husband was the ambassador to the United Kingdom for 4 years, and we did showcase American art brilliantly within the residence and had over 23,000 guests. And your art creates enormous conversation among all kinds of people, from government people to refugee children. And in my mind, you are the diplomats, not us.
As the artist, when you are approached with an opportunity, knowing that you are carrying a lot of context of what you're putting forward, the mini America as you described, or the different lenses by which people are looking at America through the art, is that present a challenge when you go to make it, and if so, how? I mean, and just speak personally, I'm mostly curious to see if it colors your thinking.
I mean, for myself, absolutely. That's how I approach my work in my studio all the time. I mean, I'm coming to it through investigations and concerns with painting. I'm a painter. I'm looking at, you know, painting as a painter, the history of it and so forth. But all these other things come into play. The way I understand things, the way that I've seen things get played out in society and culture, and so on, and my experiences with all of that. So in particular, I was thinking about those two walls in the UN, and the first wall for me is enlightenment. Approaching the building and approaching the building with your situation is that. And the second floor is joy. And that's what I wanted to be able to convey in that piece. And that's why the colors are very different from one floor to the next.
Over the years, I've done lots of things, and one of them was that I was an art handler for a corporate collection, which meant I had to put things up on the walls that came from the corporate collection. And I often encountered resistance. It's interesting that in walking around the US-UN building when we were putting the work up, we had none. People are very, very glad to see these things arrive, and they have kind of pride of possession because that's their work of art. Now, in the corporate collection, we would often take things away from people, and then they would show that they actually liked it because they'd protest. But that's never going to happen with these pieces. They're not going anywhere. So, yeah.
How do you choose your artists?
We have a committee of our advisors, people we talk to, curators and so on. We put heads together within the senior staff of FAPE, which again is all volunteers. And we try to think of people who might be willing to do this, and that's a big ask. To ask an artist to set aside the amount of time that it takes to do even the print, much less a major commission, is a very big thing to propose to somebody. And also we try to think of people who will have the knack for doing work under these circumstances. And I can tell you, doing public art is not easy. And not every artist is called. You know, they may think they want to do public art, but many of them discover in the process of doing their first commission that they don't want to do public art. So you try and go to people who have that thing, you know, and that desire, and then who have that willingness. We have long lists of people we have yet to approach that we will approach, and we have very few turn downs. We've had a few people pause us, but not say no. And so it goes, and we do as we can, as money permits, as particular embassy situations open up.
I think the role of the artist today is much as a social scientist. I think artists are much more aware of the audience. I really do. And I think we're much more sophisticated than the ivory tower idea of the artist, or the artist that is a bohemian, you know, contemplating the navel.
Yeah, one more, and I think we should wind it up. Go ahead.
You mentioned that most of the rest of the world, governments are the ones who select the art for the most part. Are there analogous organizations to FAPE in other countries?
The question was, in most countries it seems that governments select the art that is in public government buildings. Are there analogous organizations to FAPE? Not to my knowledge. I mean, there may be. It's possible that in Germany something like this exists and so on. But in terms of the history of this country, and it's sort of come up already, in the 1940s, the State Department and the government in general had a very active program of making exhibitions abroad of American art. And those were attacked very harshly by certain very conservative senators, of whom Senator Dondero was the most famous example. And those programs were essentially let go of because of that constant barrage of accusation made against them. And it was all the accusations we hear today, telling us these things never go away. So at that point, private entities began to take over that role, and the role of the International Council of the Museum of Modern Art, which began at the end of that crisis, and the job that Alfred Barr, as the director of the Museum of Modern Art, did in trying to give opportunities to take American art abroad, was to step into a breach that was created by the canning of government programs. And many people have been critical of the Modern for doing that, but I think it's misplaced criticism on every level, because basically the Modern was saying, if the government can't do this, we can. And we think it's important that people know what Americans are doing. And of course, in the 1950s, in Europe at any rate, the assumption was that there wasn't much happening here. And therefore, it was a big deal to take what was then the burgeoning New York school and put it out in public, you know? And I think that, you know, I am a great, you know, this is not for my politics, but you know, I think I'm a great believer in public and private together doing these things. And I think in a sense, FAPE is a collaboration of private individuals and of the government to do something that neither could do as well or maybe at all.
I know you want to end the questions, but I just do want to say that, in fact, the U.S. government's support for exhibitions abroad continued through the Arts America program.
That's true.
Until 1999, we had a robust traveling exhibition program, and their support for U.S. artists at international exhibitions, such as the biennials around the world, continued until 2008.
The speaker knows because she ran some of the programs. So, but that's true, but I think in the immediate aftermath of Senator Dondo's attack, things went very quiet for quite a while. I think those were revivals of later day. Yeah, they came, I think Nancy Hanks and others people sort of brought it back, you know. Anyway, I think we've probably come to the end of our afternoon, but not the end of your afternoon, so please go and look at the shows. Thank you for coming, and thank you all.